Hi, I'm Leslie Meredith with Breakbulk Events and Media, and I'm here on the second day of Breakbulk Africa in Johannesburg at the Emperor's Palace, and I have with me our keynote speaker, who's an expert in the rail situation here in Africa, and looking at working with many parties to see some big improvements and get cargo moving. So introduce yourself and give us a little background about NEPAD and what your goals are.
All right, my name is Kudzanayi Bangure. I'm a project manager with the rail division within the infrastructure desk at the NEPAD Business Foundation. NEPAD broadly is focusing on developing the continent, and we're primarily looking at how can we assist a lot of the different regional projects in accelerating them from start to finish. So if you look across the continent, there's a range of projects that have been identified through a range of programs. As an example, the NEPAD program, which is the program for infrastructure development across Africa, has a series of programs, about 51 programs that have been put on the table that are vital for developing the continent, be it in terms of energy, in terms of rail infrastructure, in terms of water infrastructure. And as NEPAD, what we're trying to focus on is to say, are there viable business cases for a lot of these rail infrastructure projects? Are the different stakeholders that are critical to progressing these projects meeting in terms of the communication? Are we looking at the right things in terms of the key pillars that are fundamental to driving these projects? So we have been focusing on a lot of the early stage involvement to package the different projects and try and accelerate them all the way through to implementation, and that speaks to getting the funding that is required for these particular projects. That speaks to unpacking the technical requirements for these projects, and that speaks to making sure you've got the relevant stakeholders. If you're talking about different ministries, be it transport, finance, the PPP units that need to be involved, and these are the different elements that we try and pull together and act in a sort of facilitation capacity to be able to progress these projects.
With a lot of moving parts.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
You have to kind of corral and coordinate a lot of pieces. Correct. Now, when we look at rail, can you give us a snapshot of what the current situation is and what the biggest challenges you're looking at addressing?
Correct. So if you look at rail in general across the continent, there are quite a lot of developments that are being planned, be it in terms of new standard gauge railway developments or be it in terms of rehabilitation of existing lines. So if you're looking at Southern Africa as an example, you have most of that Southern Africa being Cape gauge. If you're looking at East Africa, they've got a lot of new standard gauge developments that are on the go. If you go further north to Ethiopia as an example, they've just completed a new standard gauge project. If you're west of Africa, you've got a lot of meter gauge rails that are there, and they're looking at interconnector projects that need to be put up, that need to be executed. So there's a lot that's happening in terms of rehabilitation of rail infrastructure. And one of the key reasons is you've got a lot of rail infrastructure that has been dilapidating over the last 30, 40 years. Significantly old infrastructure. And not only the infrastructure, but the rolling stock as well, that is significantly old. And you've got a systemic problem where there's been lack of reinvestment in the infrastructure, lack of reinvestment in the rolling stock. And these are some of the key things that the different rail operating authorities are trying to grapple with and to try and address. To make sure that they have the relevant rehabilitation programs that can make sure all the different rail systems are up to scratch and are able to carry the volumes that they need to carry.
Right, and that must be challenging right now in our current sort of economic climate too.
Correct. And one of the key things is the first key stumbling block is the funding. If you're looking at rail infrastructure development, it is highly capital intensive, and the costs that need to be carried need to effectively be amortized over long durations, 25 to 30 years. As an example, if you're looking at rolling stock, one brand new locomotive, depending on the supplier you're talking to, is anything between $2.5 to $3 million US dollars. And that sort of capex is then amortized over a significant duration. But then you then have to link that up with the volumes that are able to sustain that particular investment. The same goes with the actual infrastructure. One has to look at that infrastructure and say, how can that be paid for? And an interesting way to look at it is if you look at road, one could argue that road does not carry the cost of its infrastructure development. Governments largely subsidize that. But when you look at rail carries the full cost of its infrastructure. And those are some of the key things that the rail sector is struggling with. To say there needs to be that fairness, if I could put it that way, of the costs that are associated with large infrastructure build, and there needs to be that realism to say, look, if we're carrying these kinds of costs, we need to have certain kinds of volumes that can support those kinds of large-scale capex projects. needs, and that in turn will assist us to get customers, which is fundamental in order
Right,
for
it's
you to have
almost a
viable.
chicken and an egg situation.
Correct.